The world was divided into two kinds of spaces for Elijah Thorne, those he owned and those he merely occupied. The 48th floor of Thorne Industries, a gleaming spear of steel and glass piercing the smoggy New York sky, was the epicenter of the former. Here, the air was filtered to a sterile crispness, the ambient temperature maintained at a perfect 68 degrees Fahrenheit, and the silence was a tangible presence, broken only by the hushed click of keyboards or the distant, muffled whir of the private elevator. It was a kingdom he had built from the ashes of his father's modest business, a monument to his own ruthlessness and icy intellect. At 52, Elijah Thorne was a man carved from marble and ambition, his silver-flecked hair always impeccably styled, his suits costing more than the annual salary of most of the people who worked for him. His reputation was not just one of wealth, but of a chilling, almost surgical detachment. He was known for dismantling competitors without a flicker of emotion, and for firing long-time employees with the same dispassionate efficiency he used to sign a merger. He believed in hierarchies, in the natural order of things, and he sat firmly, unquestionably, at the top. A world away, in the cubicle farm on the 23rd floor, was Anya Johnson. She existed in the spaces he merely occupied, a part of the machinery that kept his empire running. At 28, she was a junior marketing associate, brilliant and fiercely dedicated, her mind a whirlwind of creative campaigns and untapped potential. She was the kind of employee who stayed late not for show, but because she genuinely believed in the polish of her work. Her presence was a quiet rebellion against the beige conformity of her surroundings. Where others wilted under the fluorescent lights, Anya seemed to absorb and reflect a warmer glow. Her skin, the rich, warm tone of mahogany, her hair a crown of tight, intricate braids that cascaded down her back, her eyes the color of dark honey. She carried herself with a grace that had nothing to do with corporate ladder climbing and everything to do with a deep, inherent strength. She was acutely aware of the unspoken lines that crisscrossed the office, the lines of race, where she was often the only black face in a meeting, the lines of class, evidenced by the careful way she budgeted her salary against her mother's medical bills and her younger brother's college tuition. She navigated these lines with a professional smile and a guarded heart, her ambition a quiet, burning ember she protected from the dismissive glances of men like Elijah Thorne. Their worlds collided on a Tuesday during the annual Thorne Industries Gala, the most glittering event on the company's social calendar. The grand ballroom was a spectacle of wealth, a sea of designer gowns and tuxedos, the clinking of champagne flutes a constant, tinkling melody. Elijah moved through the crowd like a shark, his smile a cold, calculated gesture, his handshakes firm and brief. He was holding court near the ice sculpture, discussing market volatility with a senator when he saw her. Anya was part of the junior team tasked with ensuring the event ran smoothly, a ghost in the glittering machine. She was wearing a simple but elegant black dress, a stark contrast to the flamboyant colors around her. But it was her expression that caught him, not the placid professionalism of the other staff, but a flicker of acute distress. She was trying to discreetly reach for something on her back, her movements stiff and awkward. A strap, he realized. Something was wrong with her dress. He watched, intrigued by this crack in the corporate facade. He saw her whisper to a female colleague who merely shrugged and gestured to her own busy clipboard. He saw the flush of humiliation creep up Anya's neck. It was a tiny, human drama playing out in the midst of his cold, perfect world. And then a decision was made, not in his conscious mind, but in some deeper, dormant part of him. He excused himself from the senator and walked towards her. The crowd seemed to part, a ripple of surprise following in his wake. To approach a junior employee was unusual. To approach her was noteworthy. "Is there a problem, MS?" he asked, his voice cutting through the ambient noise. He knew her name, of course. He made it a point to know the names of all his employees, a tool of control. Anya flinched, turning to face him. Her honey-colored eyes were wide with shock and mortification. "Mr. Thorne, it's nothing, sir. My zipper, it's stuck. I just need to find a safety pin. A safety pin is a poor solution for a designer gown, he stated, the words coming out more softly than he intended. He gestured with his chin towards a secluded anteroom off the main ballroom, a small space used for storing extra chairs. In there. I'll assist you. The air left her lungs. The suggestion was so far beyond the realm of professional conduct it was almost laughable. The CEO of the company helping her, a junior associate with a broken zipper. The power dynamics, the racial undertones, the sheer insanity of it all screamed at her to refuse. But his gaze was unwavering, not lecherous, but commanding. It felt less like an offer and more like an order from a different plane of existence. Swallowing her pride and her panic, she gave a tight nod and led the way into the small, dimly lit room. The door clicked shut, muffling the sounds of the gala to a distant hum. They were alone. The space was suddenly intimate, charged with a tension so thick it was suffocating. The air smelled of old wood and dust, a stark contrast to the perfumed opulence outside. "Turn around," Elijah said, his voice low. Anya turned, presenting her back to him, her entire body trembling. She felt the warmth of his presence behind her, the scent of his expensive cologne, sandalwood and bergamot filling the small space. His fingers, long and elegant, brushed against the bare skin of her back as he fumbled with the tiny, stubborn zipper. It was the briefest of contacts, a mere whisper of skin on skin, but it sent a jolt through both of them, a seismic shock that bypassed all reason and social construct. For Elijah, it was the first time in decades he had touched someone without an agenda, without a transaction. The skin under his fingers was warm, alive, real. For Anya, it was a violation and a revelation. The most powerful man in her world was performing a menial, intimate task for her. The arrogance she expected was absent. In its place was a focused, almost clumsy concentration. He worked the zipper carefully, his brow furrowed. "It's caught on the fabric," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "There." With a gentle tug, the zipper slid free. He pulled it up, his knuckles grazing her spine once more. The task was complete. Anya turned around, her arms crossed over her chest, holding the dress in place. Her eyes were glistening with unshed tears of shame and a confusing, electric awareness. "Thank you, Mr. Thorne," she whispered, her voice thick. He didn't move. He just looked at her, truly looked at her, not as an employee, not as a statistic in his diversity report, but as a woman. He saw the intelligence in her eyes, the strength in her jaw, the vulnerability she was trying so hard to conceal. He saw the beautiful, undeniable humanity of her. The marble facade of Elijah Thorne developed its first hairline crack. "You should get back to your post," he said, his voice strangely hoarse. She fled, the door swinging shut behind her, leaving him alone in the dusty silence. Elijah stood there for a long moment, staring at his hands, the hands that had just closed a multi-billion-dollar deal, the hands that had just unstuck a young woman's zipper. He felt disoriented, as if the axis of his world had tilted. The cold, orderly universe he had constructed now felt sterile and empty. The memory of her warm skin was a brand on his fingertips. That single, innocent moment became an obsession. Elijah found his thoughts drifting to Anya Johnson during board meetings. He'd watch her in the cafeteria from his perch on the executive mezzanine, nodding the way she laughed with her friends, the earnest way she presented her ideas in interdepartmental briefings. He started requesting marketing reports directly from her, bypassing her managers. The emails began terse, professional queries about market trends that slowly, subtly, evolved into more personal exchanges. He discovered her wit, her sharp observations about the world, her quiet passion for art history. She was cautious, always professional, but he could feel a curiosity blooming in her responses, a reluctant fascination with the man behind the myth. The imbalance of power was a chasm between them, and they were both acutely aware of it. He was the CEO, she was a subordinate. He was white, old money, she was black, working class. Every interaction was loaded, every glance dissected by the prying eyes of the office. The whispers started, of course. They were a low, venomous hum in the break rooms. She's sleeping her way to the top. Of course he'd go for the exotic one. She knows exactly what she's doing. Anya felt the weight of those whispers like physical blows. Colleagues who had once been friendly now looked at her with envy or contempt. Her hard work was suddenly attributed to special favors. She ate her lunch alone more often, the taste of isolation bitter on her tongue. Elijah, insulated by his wealth and position, was largely deaf to the gossip, but he wasn't blind to its effect on her. He saw the new wariness in her eyes, the way she stiffened when he entered a room. It angered him, this invisible force that sought to diminish her, to reduce what was happening between them to a sordid cliché. What was happening? He didn't have a name for it. It was a pull, a gravitational force he could no longer resist. He asked her to dinner, not a command but a question sent in an email from his private account. I would like to speak with you somewhere unaffiliated with Thorn Industries. Would you have dinner with me? Anya read the email a dozen times. It was a terrible idea, a career-ending, heartbreaking, scandal-inviting idea. She thought of her mother, a proud woman who had scrubbed floors to put her through college, who would warn her about the dangers of getting involved with a man like that. She thought of her brother who looked up to her. She thought of the whispers which would now become shouts. But she also thought of the man in the storeroom, the one whose hands had been gentle, whose gaze had been stripped of all arrogance. Against every screaming instinct of self-preservation, she typed a single word in reply. Yes. Their first dinner was in a small, unassuming Italian restaurant in Brooklyn, a world away from the Michelin-starred establishments he frequented. He was late, she was early. The air between them was thick with unspoken words. He asked her about her family, her dreams. She spoke of her mother's failing health, her brother's ambition to be an engineer, her own desire to one day start her own nonprofit for arts education in underserved schools. He listened, truly listened, as no one had ever listened to her before. He, in turn, spoke not of deals and profits, but of the loneliness of his position, the weight of constant expectation, the ghost of a father who had never offered a word of praise. He spoke of a marriage that had been a business arrangement, now a cold, silent truce lived out in separate wings of a Park Avenue penthouse. He was vulnerable in a way she had never imagined possible. It was a betrayal on multiple fronts. He was betraying his wife, Catherine, a woman of his own social stratum with whom he shared a life of icy civility. Anya was betraying her own principles, crossing a line she had sworn she never would. But in that little restaurant, over a shared bottle of Chianti, the betrayal felt like the most honest thing in the world. The clandestine meetings became the center of their orbits. Stolen afternoons in art galleries where they would debate the meaning of a painting, long walks in parks where they could hold hands like any ordinary couple, passionate nights in anonymous hotel rooms where the world and its judgments were locked outside. Elijah was a man transformed. The cold CEO thawed under the warmth of Anya's love. He laughed, a genuine, uncalculated sound. He discovered a capacity for tenderness he never knew he possessed. He bought her gifts, not just expensive trinkets but thoughtful things. A first edition of her favorite novel, a scarf the color of her eyes. He paid off her mother's medical debts anonymously, an act that made Anya weep with a mixture of gratitude and shame. But the outside world was a beast that would not be ignored. The scandal broke like a thunderclap. A disgruntled former employee, passed over for a promotion Anya received, sold the story to a tabloid. The headline was brutal: THORNE's Tropical Temptation, CEO's secret affair with black staffer. The article was a masterpiece of insinuation, painting Anya as a cunning seductress and Elijah as a powerful man led astray by his baser instincts. The racial and classist undertones were not undertones at all. They were the main event. The fallout was immediate and vicious. The Thorn Industries board was in an uproar. Stock prices dipped. Catherine, his wife, issued a cold, furious ultimatum: end it immediately or face a divorce that would shred the company and his reputation. She was a scion of old wealth, and her family's connections could bury him. Elijah's children from his marriage, two young adults who had always viewed him with a mixture of fear and resentment, sent texts of disgust and disappointment. For Anja, it was a waking nightmare. Her professional reputation was eviscerated. She was placed on indefinite administrative leave. Her photo was splashed across every gossip site, her social media flooded with racist vitriol and threats. Former friends distanced themselves. The world saw not a brilliant, kind woman but a stereotype. She was called a gold digger, a Jezebel, a social climber. The strength she had cultivated her entire life was tested in a crucible of public hatred. She stayed in her small apartment, the blinds drawn, feeling the walls of her world collapse in on her. The pressure on Elijah was immense, a siege from all sides. His lawyers, his board, his friends, his family, all demanded he renounce her, call it a mistake, a moment of weakness, and return to the pristine, white world he belonged to. He summoned her to his penthouse one evening, the city lights sprawling beneath them like a carpet of diamonds. He looked haggard, the weight of the world bowing his shoulders. "Anja," he began, his voice strained. This is destroying everything. The company, my family." Her heart, which had been a fragile, hopeful thing, turned to ice in her chest. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the pull of a lifetime of conditioning. "So, that's it?" she asked, her voice quiet but steady. "You're going to let them win. You're going to reduce what we have to a mistake." "It's not that simple," he roared, his frustration boiling over. "You don't understand the forces at play here. This isn't just about us. It's about billions of dollars, hundreds of jobs, my entire legacy." "And what about my legacy?" she fired back, tears finally spilling over. "What about my job, my reputation, my dignity? Or does that not count in your billion-dollar equation? I knew the risks. I took them for you because I thought you were different. I thought what we had was real." "It is real," he insisted, grabbing her arms. "But reality has consequences, Anja. We come from different worlds." "You keep saying that," she whispered, pulling away from his grasp. "But you never seem to understand that your world is trying to erase mine, and right now you're helping them." She looked at him, her gaze filled with a profound, heartbreaking disappointment. "I love you, Elijah, but I will not be your secret. I will not be your shame. If you can't stand with me in the light, then you are not the man I thought you were." She turned and walked out of his penthouse, out of his life, leaving him standing alone in his gilded cage. It was the greatest betrayal she had ever experienced, not from the faceless mob, but from the man who had sworn he saw her, the real her. Elijah let her go. He chose his empire. He held a press conference, a sterile, humiliating spectacle where he stood beside a stoic Catherine and called his relationship with Anja a profound error in judgment, a lapse that he deeply regretted. He used the language of corporate crisis management to describe the most authentic connection of his life. He saw the clip on the news. He saw the pain in Catherine's eyes, the triumph in the reporters, and he felt nothing but a hollow, echoing emptiness. He had won, he had saved his company, and he had lost his soul. Anja disappeared. She resigned from Thorn Industries, changed her number, and moved to a small town upstate to care for her ailing mother, who had been shaken but unwavering in her support. The public moved on to the next scandal. The whispers in the office eventually died down. Elijah returned to his life of cold efficiency, a king ruling a silent, frozen kingdom. The marble man was fully restored, but now he was cracked from the inside, a fragile vessel threatening to shatter. He tried to contact her, to send money, to explain, but every attempt was met with silence. She had erased herself from his world as thoroughly as he had tried to erase her from his story. Months bled into a year. The emptiness inside Elijah became a physical ache. The success he had craved his entire life tasted like ash. The memory of Anja was a ghost that haunted his every waking moment. He'd see a woman with her laugh on the street and his breath would catch. He'd smell her perfume in a crowded room and feel a stab of loss so acute it was debilitating. He had learned too late that some fortunes cannot be measured on a balance sheet. Then one ordinary Tuesday, an unmarked manila envelope arrived at his office, bypassing his assistant. There was no return address. Frowning, he sliced it open. Inside was a single grainy photograph, the kind taken from an ultrasound, and a note written in a familiar, elegant hand. You chose your legacy. Here is a part of mine and yours. They are a boy and a girl. The world stopped. The air left his lungs. He stared at the black and white image, at the two tiny, blurry forms, twins, a son and a daughter. His mind reeled, a cacophony of disbelief, shock, and a terrifying, overwhelming surge of a feeling so primal it obliterated everything in its path. It was not anger, not fear. It was love. A ferocious, all-consuming love for these two lives he had never known, for the woman who had carried them, for the family he had thrown away. He was out of his chair, the photo clutched in his trembling hand. He didn't call his driver. He didn't call his lawyer. He ran. He ran out of his office, past his stunned assistant, into the private elevator, through the gleaming lobby. He hailed a taxi, something he hadn't done in 30 years, and barked an address. The last known address for Anya's mother. A piece of information he had paid a private investigator to find months ago and had kept locked in his desk. A secret hope. The journey was a blur. The sleek cityscapes gave way to the quieter, tree-lined streets of a suburban town. He found the small, modest house with the well-kept garden. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs. He knocked on the door, his expensive shoes on the worn welcome mat. The door opened, and there she was, Anya. She was more beautiful than he remembered, her body softened by pregnancy, her face etched with a new, profound tiredness, but her eyes held the same strength, now tempered by a deep, unshakable serenity. In her arms she held a tiny bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. In a bassinet just inside the door another slept, swaddled in pink. For a long moment they just looked at each other, the chasm of a year of silence and pain stretching between them. The arrogant CEO, the betrayed worker, the white man, the black woman, all those labels fell away, rendered meaningless by the two small, sleeping miracles in the room. Anya, he breathed, his voice cracking. She didn't smile, she didn't shut the door. She simply stepped back, a silent invitation. He stepped over the threshold into her world. He looked from the baby in her arms to the one in the bassinet, his children, his son and his daughter, with skin the color of warm caramel. A perfect blend of their two worlds. The sight was a physical blow, a redemption so powerful it brought him to his knees. Right there, in the small, cluttered hallway, the mighty Elijah Thorne knelt. He reached a trembling hand towards the baby in her arms. Anya hesitated for only a second before gently placing the infant into his waiting arms. He cradled his son, feeling the tiny weight, the steady heartbeat against his own. He looked up at Anya, his eyes filled with a torrent of tears he did not try to hide. "I was wrong," he whispered, the words of vow. "I was a fool. I threw away the only real thing I ever had. I don't deserve your forgiveness. I don't deserve them." He looked down at his son's face, at the perfect miniature features. "But I will spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy. Not of my name or my company, but of you, of this family." Anya watched him, the man who had broken her heart, now broken himself at her feet. She saw not the powerful CEO, but a father seeing his children for the first time. She saw the genuine, raw remorse. The love she had tried so hard to extinguish flickered back to life, not as a naive flame, but as a steady, enduring ember. The road ahead would be unimaginably hard. The scandal would reignite with twice the fury. His world would fight this tooth and nail. Her world would question her sanity for taking him back. The challenges of race and class would not magically disappear. They would be the landscape their children would have to navigate. But in that moment, as he held their son and looked at her with a soul laid bare, none of that mattered. They were no longer just a wealthy CEO and his worker. They were a man and a woman, bound by a love that had survived betrayal, and by the two beautiful, impossible children who were their future. He had chosen his legacy once, and it had left him empty. Now, kneeling on a worn linoleum floor holding his son, he knew his true legacy was right here, in this small house, in this woman's strong heart. It was a legacy not of wealth, but of love, a love that was finally, defiantly enough. He did not get up from his knees. The polished man who commanded boardrooms with a glance remained on the scuffed linoleum, his son, a warm, breathing weight in the crook of his arm. The infant stirred, a tiny fist escaping the blue blanket, waving in the air before finding a resting place against the starched, $1,000 fabric of Elijah's shirt. It was the most profound touch he had ever felt. Anya watched him. The year of silence, of pain, of rebuilding her life piece by shattered piece, hung between them. She had built a fortress around her heart, and with a single photograph he had blown the gates open. She saw the tears tracking through the day's stubble on his cheeks, the raw, unguarded awe in his eyes as he looked from their son to their daughter in the bassinet. This was not the man from the press conference. That man had been a sculpture, a corporate avatar. This was the man from the storeroom, the one who had been vulnerable first. Only now the vulnerability was absolute, a complete surrender. "His name is Elias," she said softly, the sound of her voice startling in the quiet hallway. "After my father." Elijah's breath hitched. He looked up at her, his gaze liquid. "Elias," he repeated, the name a prayer on his lips. He looked at the baby girl. "And her." "Amara," Anya said. "It means grace." A name chosen with intention, a balm for a year that had been utterly graceless. "Amara," he whispered. He leaned forward, his forehead gently touching Anya's abdomen, his body curling around their son. It was a posture of supplication, of homecoming. Anya's hand hovered for a moment before she let it rest on his silver-flecked hair. The gesture was forgiveness, or at least the beginning of it. The world did not stop its turning. The phone in his pocket buzzed incessantly, his driver, his assistant, his wife. He ignored it. The universe had shrunk to this hallway, to the scent of baby powder and milk, to the quiet rhythm of his children's breathing. He stayed for hours. He learned how to support Elias' neck, how to warm a bottle of expressed milk under running water, how to change a diaper with fumbling, inefficient hands that had once signed documents that shifted global markets. Anya's mother, Beatrice, emerged from her bedroom, a frail woman with Anya's resilient eyes. She regarded him not with anger but with a deep, weary understanding. She had known men like him, men who thought the world was theirs to command, only to find it was love that commanded them. "You hurt my girl," Beatrice said, her voice a thin reed of sound. "I know," Elijah replied, meeting her gaze, "and I will spend every day making sure I never do again." When the twins were finally asleep, swaddled and peaceful in their shared crib, Anya led him to the small living room. The silence between them was no longer charged with accusation, but with the immensity of what came next. "The press," Anya began, her voice trailing off. "Let them come," Elijah said, his voice firm for the first time since he'd arrived. The fear that had dictated his actions a year ago was gone, incinerated by a more powerful force. "I don't care." "You say that now," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "But your company, Catherine." "Catherine and I have been living separate lives for a decade. The press conference was the last performance. It's over." He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. "The company is a thing I built. This," he said, his gaze flickering towards the room where the twins slept, then back to her, "this is a life. I chose the thing over the life once. I will not make that mistake again." He meant it. In that moment, with the warmth of her hand in his, he meant it with every fiber of his being. But the machinery of his old life was vast and relentless. His disappearance had caused panic. By the time he turned his phone back on, it was with a barrage of missed calls and frantic texts. He called his lawyer. "I'm at Anya Johnson's residence," he said, his voice leaving no room for questions. "We have twins, a son and a daughter. Draw up the divorce papers. I'll be giving a statement on my terms this time." Scandal erupted anew, a supernova of speculation and bigotry. Thornes love children. Billionaire baby drama. The narrative was salacious, focused on the twins, their skin tone analyzed in vile online forums, their existence proof of every stereotype the world wanted to pin on Anya. But this time, Elijah did not hide. He resigned as CEO of Thorn Industries, a move that sent shockwaves through the financial world. He installed a trusted deputy and stepped away, truly away. He moved into a penthouse a few blocks from his old one, but this one was chosen for its light, its space, its suitability for a family. He begged Anya and the twins to move in with him. It was not an easy decision. For Anya, it felt like stepping back into the lion's den, into the world that had tried to devour her. "I can't live in your world, Elijah," she told him, standing in the modest bedroom of her mother's house. "I won't let them grow up as the billionaire's secret mixed-race kids," a headline for the rest of their lives. "Then we'll make our own world," he insisted. "A private world. We'll have security, we'll control the narrative, but I need to be with you, with them, every day." It was the children who tipped the scales. The small house was straining at the seams. Beatrice's health was precarious, and the constant vigilance against reporters was exhausting. Finally, reluctantly, Anya agreed. The transition was a battlefield. The new penthouse was a fortress. Security details, privacy screens, a strict non-disclosure agreement for the new nannies. It was a life under glass. Anya felt like a specimen, a jewel in a gilded cage. The whispers in the grocery store were replaced by the silent, judging looks of the doormen in their building. She was an outsider, and everyone knew it. The first time Catherine saw the twins was a disaster. She had come to the penthouse to finalize some divorce paperwork, her demeanor icy and composed. When she saw Elias and Amara in their playpen, her mask slipped for a fraction of a second. It wasn't jealousy, but a profound, shocking sadness. "So it was real," she said, her voice barely audible. "It was always real, Catherine," Elijah said. She looked at Anya, a long, assessing look. "You have no idea what you've taken on," she said, not with malice but with a strange, weary prescience. Then she left, the click of her heels on the marble floor echoing like a final period on their old life. The greater challenge was Elijah's own children, Rachel and David. They were furious, their sense of betrayal amplified by the public humiliation. They refused to meet the twins, refused to speak to Anya. At a tense dinner, David, his face a mask of contempt, had looked at his father and said, "You threw away our family for that. You're a cliché, Dad, a pathetic old cliché." The words hung in the air, poisonous and sharp. Elijah had flinched, but he hadn't backed down. "I am trying to build a new family, David. I hope one day you'll be a part of it." But the most insidious enemy was the one they couldn't see, the world's relentless attempt to define them. A society blog managed to get a blurry photo of Anya pushing a double stroller in a private park. The caption read, "Nanny or Mom, Thorne's Bobby's out for a walk." The erasure was as painful as the outright attack. She was constantly mistaken for the help, her authority as their mother questioned at every turn. One afternoon, a woman at an exclusive children's clothing store, seeing Anya browsing alone, had chirped, "Are these for the Thorne Bobbies? Oh, they're so lucky. Their mother must be thrilled to have such capable assistants." Anya had turned, her honey eyes flashing with a fire Elijah had never seen. "I am their mother," she said, her voice cold and clear, cutting through the store's perfumed air. The woman had stammered an apology, her face flushing crimson. That night, Anya broke down. "I can't do this, Elijah. I am so tired of fighting. I am tired of having to prove I belong to my own children. I am tired of being invisible and hypervisible at the same time." He held her as she sobbed, her tears soaking his shirt. He felt a helpless, towering rage, not at individuals but at the faceless, hydra-headed monster of prejudice. He had spent his life building walls of money and power to protect himself, but they were useless against this. This was a war fought in whispers and glances, a war Anya had been fighting her entire life, and he was only now, clumsily, learning to be her ally. "We'll leave," he said, his voice grim. "New York, the company, all of it. We'll go to California, London, Tokyo, anywhere." "And then what?" she cried, pulling away. "Run forever, that's not a life. That's not the example I want to set for them." She looked towards the nursery where Elias and Amara slept, innocent of the storms that raged around their cribs. "They need to be strong. They need to know who they are. and they can't learn that if we're always hiding. Her strength, which had first drawn him in that storeroom, now astounded him. In the face of a world that sought to diminish her, she was demanding not just acceptance, but a space to exist on her own terms. It was a lesson in courage he was still learning. The turning point came with Elia's first birthday. Anya insisted on a party, a small one at the penthouse. She invited a few of her old, true friends from before the scandal, and against all odds, she also invited Rachel and David. They are their siblings, she told a hesitant Elijah. The door has to be open, always. The party was strained. Rachel and David came, their politeness a brittle shield. But then, as the cake was brought out, little Amara, who had just started to walk, toddled unsteadily towards David. She looked up at this tall, brooding stranger, her father's eyes in her beautiful, brown face, and she raised her arms, demanding to be picked up. David froze. The entire room held its breath. He looked at his father, at Anya, then back down at the small, trusting face. Slowly, hesitantly, he bent down and lifted his half-sister into his arms. Amara giggled, patting his cheek with a sticky hand. A crack appeared in David's stony expression. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a recognition of a shared, unbreakable bond. It was in that moment, watching his estranged son hold his daughter, that Elijah understood the true nature of the legacy he was now building. It wasn't about bloodlines or surnames or stock portfolios. It was about these moments of fragile connection, about the courage to keep a door open when every instinct said to slam it shut. It was about the quiet, fierce determination of the woman beside him, who, despite every reason to be hardened, had chosen to leave that door open for his children, for their family. He slipped his arm around Anya's waist, pulling her close. She leaned into him, her head resting on his shoulder. The journey ahead was still long. The world would never stop throwing its challenges at them. There would be more whispers, more betrayals, more moments of doubt and pain. But as he looked around the room, at his son holding his daughter, at his other son babbling on the floor, at the woman he loved in his arms, he knew a truth more powerful than any he had ever known in a boardroom. He had spent a lifetime building an empire of money and influence, and it had almost cost him his soul. Now he was building something else, something messier, more vulnerable, and infinitely more valuable. He was building a family, and this fortress, built not of marble and steel, but of love, grace, and an unbreakable will, was one that no scandal, no prejudice, and no power on earth could ever tear down. The wealthy white CEO had fallen, but in his place, a father, a partner, a man, was finally rising, and his story was only just beginning. The peace, hard-won and fragile, settled over them like a fine, precious dust. It was in the small, unremarkable moments that Elijah found his redemption. The first time Elias, his chubby fingers clutching a purple crayon, scrawled something that vaguely resembled a circle and declared it Dada. Elijah had framed the paper and hung it in his private study, where once hung awards for Business Innovator of the Year. The first time Amara, with Anya's fierce determination in her tiny brow, tried to put her own shoes on the wrong feet, stubbornly refusing help until she achieved her lopsided victory, Elijah felt a pride more profound than any corporate takeover had ever elicited. Their world was a carefully constructed ecosystem, a blend of extreme privilege and intentional normalcy. The penthouse had a floor dedicated entirely to the children, a sun-drenched wonderland of toys and books, but Anya insisted on taking them to public libraries and parks in diverse neighborhoods, under the discreet watch of security. They need to hear other children, see other families, know that the world isn't all marble floors and private elevators. She would tell Elijah, who had to consciously override a lifetime of instinct that screamed to bubble-wrap them in luxury. He was learning. He learned to get down on his hands and knees to play with wooden trains, his expensive trousers be damned. He learned the words to insufferably catchy children's songs, his baritone a comical contrast to the squeaky melodies. He learned that a scraped knee required a specific brand of cartoon Band-Aid, and a kiss delivered in a very specific sequence. This was a new type of negotiation, one where the stakes were a child's tears and failure was not an option. Anya, meanwhile, was carving out her own space within the gilded cage. She started a small, online art consultancy, using the knowledge from her abandoned art history dreams to help new, diverse artists navigate the intimidating world of galleries and collectors. It was her rebellion, her way of asserting that she was more than just the mother of Elijah Thorne's children. He supported her unconditionally, financially and emotionally, but he understood this was her territory, her kingdom. He was merely a privileged visitor. The outside world, however, never truly ceased its murmur. The divorce from Catherine was finalized, a clean, clinical severance that cost him a significant portion of his fortune but felt like a bargain for his freedom. Rachel and David began a slow, tentative thaw. It started with birthday cards, then progressed to brief, awkward visits. David, especially, found himself disarmed by the twins. Their unconditional adoration was a balm his cynical soul hadn't known it needed. He never quite warmed to Anya, but a tense respect settled between them, built on the shared, unspoken understanding that they both loved these children. The real test came when Elias and Amara turned 3. They were no longer Bobbies. They were little people with distinct personalities and a burgeoning awareness of the world. Elias was thoughtful, observant, with Elijah's piercing gaze and a quiet intensity. Amara was all fire and motion, a carbon copy of her mother's spirit, fearless and curious. It was a sunny afternoon in the park, one of their normal outings. Anya was pushing Amara on a swing, while Elijah was helping Elias build a precarious castle in the sandbox. A well-dressed woman with a similarly aged child smiled at Elijah. "Your son is just adorable," she cooed. "He has your eyes." "Thank you," Elijah said, a genuine smile touching his lips. It was a common occurrence, this recognition of his features in his son's face. The woman's gaze then flickered to Anya, who was laughing, lifting Amara high into the air. The little girl's joyous shrieks filled the space between them. The woman's smile tightened, becoming perfunctory. "And is that the nanny? She's wonderful with your daughter." The air went out of Elijah's lungs. It was the casualness of the erasure that struck him, the effortless way this stranger dismantled his family, reducing the love of his life to hired help. Before he could form a response, a sound he'd never heard from Elias came from the sandbox. A small, confused whimper. Elias was looking from the woman to his father, his little brow furrowed. He might not have understood the words, but he understood the tone, the energy. He understood that this woman had placed his mother outside their circle. Anya had heard. She lowered Amara to the ground, her body stiff. The laughter was gone from her face, replaced by a weary, familiar mask of defensive pride. She had prepared for this, braced for it every day, but seeing the confusion on her son's face made the old wound bleed afresh. Elijah stood up, his 6'3" frame suddenly imposing. He walked over to Anya, slipping his arm around her waist and pulling her firmly against his side. He looked directly at the woman, his voice calm but carrying an edge that had once made Fortune 500 CEOs blanch. "This is not the nanny," he said, his tone leaving no room for ambiguity. "This is my wife, Anya Thorne, the mother of my children." The woman's face flushed a deep, mortified crimson. She stammered an apology, gathered her child, and practically fled. The damage was done. The rest of the afternoon was shadowed. Elias was clingy and quiet. Amara, sensitive to the shift in mood, became fussy. On the car ride home, nestled in their car seats, Elias asked a question in his small, serious voice. "Daddy, why did that lady think Mommy was the nanny?" Anya closed her eyes, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. This was the battle she had dreaded most, the one fought in the heart of her child. Elijah met his son's gaze in the rearview mirror. "Because, son," he said, choosing his words with more care than he had ever chosen any business strategy, "some people see the world in a very small, very silly way. They think families should all look the same. But our family is special. We're a map. Mommy's love is one country and Daddy's love is another, and you and your sister are the beautiful, brand new land right in the middle. That lady had never seen a map like ours before. It was a simplified, child-friendly version of the truth, but it was a start. Elias seemed to ponder this, his little mind turning over the concept of being a brand new land. That night after the children were asleep, Elijah found Anya on the terrace, staring out at the glittering city. The same city that had judged her, scorned her, and tried to erase her. "I'm tired, Elijah," she whispered, her voice raw. "I'm so tired of having to explain my existence, of having to justify my place in my own family. What happens when they start school? When other children repeat what they hear their parents say? I can't protect them from that with a pretty story about maps." He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her, resting his chin on her head. "Then we will give them better stories," he murmured into her hair. "And we will give them armor, the armor of knowing without a single doubt that they are loved, that they are wanted, that they are the best thing we have ever done." He turned her to face him. "And we will not be silent, not anymore." The incident in the park became a catalyst. The cautious, defensive life was no longer enough. Anya, fueled by a mother's ferocity, began writing. She started a blog, anonymous at first, titled The Mapmaker's Wife. She wrote about the microaggressions, the painful assumptions, the joy of her children, and the complex, beautiful challenge of building a family across the fissures of race and class. It was poignant, sharp, and deeply human. It went viral. Suddenly, she had a platform, a voice. Women from all over the world wrote to her, sharing their own stories of invisible battles. Elijah, watching her find her power, was filled with an awe that bordered on reverence. He used his own influence, not for corporate gain, but for her. He funded a foundation in her name, the Johnson Thorne Foundation, dedicated to supporting interracial families and providing educational resources on racial bias. It was their declaration of war, fought not with anger but with purpose. The past, however, is a ghost that seldom stays buried. On the eve of the twins' 5th birthday, a ghost arrived in the form of a phone call. It was Catherine. Her voice was strained, stripped of its usual ice. "Elijah, we need to talk. It's about David." David had been involved in a car accident. It was minor, but a routine blood test at the hospital had revealed something shocking. Something that unraveled the last threads of the narrative of Elijah's first marriage. David was not his biological son. The revelation was an earthquake. The cold, transactional marriage he had endured with Catherine had been, for her, an escape from a previous, secret relationship with a man her powerful family would never have accepted. David was the result. She had passed him off as Elijah's, a lie that had shaped their entire lives, a lie that explained the constant, unbridgeable distance Elijah had always felt from the boy. Sitting in the stark silence of his study after the call, Elijah felt the foundations of his past crumble. The son he had struggled to connect with, the son whose resentment had cut him so deeply, was never his. The legacy he thought he was protecting when he betrayed Anya was a fraud. He didn't feel anger. He felt a profound, staggering grief for the years lost, for the love that could have been given to David freely without the pressure of bloodline. And in that grief, he understood something fundamental. Biology was a circumstance. Fatherhood was a choice. He went to the hospital. David was sitting up in bed, his face a mixture of defiance and a deep, shocking vulnerability. He expected rage, rejection. Elijah walked to the bedside and placed a hand on David's shoulder. "It doesn't change anything," he said, his voice firm. "You are my son. You have always been my son. A piece of paper doesn't get to decide that. I do." David, the cynical, hardened young man, broke down and wept. In that hospital room, the final wall between them fell. The love that had been conditional on a biological lie became unconditional, chosen, and real. When Elijah returned home, he went straight to the twins' room. They were asleep, a tangle of limbs and soft breathing. He then found Anya in her office, bathed in the light of her laptop screen. He told her everything. About Catherine's confession, about David, about the hollow legacy he had almost sacrificed her for. Anya listened, her expression unreadable. When he finished, she was silent for a long time. Then she stood, walked over to him, and took his face in her hands. "All this time," she said softly, "you were trying to live up to a legacy that was never even real. And all this time, the real one was right here." She kissed him, a kiss of forgiveness, of understanding, of a shared, painful history that had finally, fully, lost its power over them. The twins' 5th birthday party was not held in the penthouse. It was held in the sprawling garden of their new home, a house in a neighborhood known for its diversity, with a big, messy backyard and no marble in sight. It was filled with laughter, with children of every color, with Anya's friends and family, with Rachel, and with David, who held Amara on his shoulders, making her queen of the world. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Elijah stood with his arm around Anya, watching their children. Elias was explaining the intricate rules of a game he'd invented to a captivated audience, while Amara, a whirlwind of sequins and joy, was trying to teach David how to dance. The wealthy white CEO was gone. The betrayed black worker was gone. In their place stood a man and a woman, partners, mapmakers. Their story had been one of arrogance and innocence, of betrayal and scandal, of racism and power. But as he looked at his family, his chosen son, his biological children, his fierce, graceful wife, he knew that the final, triumphant twist was not in the shocking birth of the twins, but in the life they had built afterwards. It was a life not defined by the divides of the world, but by the bridges they had built across them. The whispers remained, but they were now just background noise, a distant echo from a shore they had long since left behind. They were sailing on into a future of their own making, their love the only compass they would ever need. The silence that followed was not empty, but full. It was the rich, humming silence of a life being lived, not performed. The new house, with its creaky floorboards and slightly overgrown garden, was a sanctuary. Here, Elias could dig for worms without a bodyguard hovering, and Amara could paint murals on her bedroom wall without anyone worrying about the resale value. The world's gaze had softened, or perhaps they had simply grown a thicker skin, a carapace of shared experience that made the occasional dart of prejudice bounce off harmlessly. The Johnson Thorne Foundation became Anya's true calling. She shed the anonymity of her blog and stepped into the spotlight, her voice becoming a calm, powerful force in conversations about race, family, and belonging. She was no longer Elijah Thorne's secret. She was his partner, his equal in the eyes of the world they were trying to change. She traveled to conferences, gave interviews, and used the very notoriety that had once haunted her as a platform for empathy. Elijah, meanwhile, managed the foundation's vast financial engine with the same shrewdness he'd once reserved for hostile takeovers. But now the profits were measured in scholarships, community programs, and changed minds. The children were the anchor and the sail. At 7, Elias was a quiet force. He had inherited his father's analytical mind but filtered it through his mother's profound empathy. He would spend hours building elaborate, intricate structures with his blocks, only to explain they were apartment buildings for bees, because he'd noticed the pollinators struggling in the park. He was the peacemaker on the playground, the one who noticed the child sitting alone. His questions about the world were deep, unsettlingly perceptive. "Daddy," he asked one evening, looking up from a history book about the civil rights movement, "if you were alive then, would you have been one of the good white people, the one who marched?" The question hit Elijah with the force of a physical blow. He looked at his son, at the sincere curiosity in his eyes, eyes that were a mirror of his own, set in a face the world would never see as wholly his. How to explain the complexities of privilege, of complacency, of the fact that the man he was before Anya would likely have considered such marches a disruptive nuisance to business? "I hope I would have, son," he said, choosing his words with immense care. But the truth is, it's easier to be a good person now when I'm being taught what's right by you and your mother. Back then, without them, I'm not so sure. The important thing is to be one of the good people now. Elias considered this, his small face serious. So we're teaching you, he stated, not asked. Yes, Elijah said, his throat tight. Every day you are teaching me. Amara, at 7, was a whirlwind of audacity and art. She wore her identity like a superhero's cape. When a girl in her class told her she couldn't be a princess because princesses have straight hair, Amara had arrived at school the next day with her braids woven with gold thread and a scepter made from a painted cardboard tube. I'm the queen of the map, she declared, a phrase she'd adopted from Elijah's long-ago explanation. She felt no need to explain herself. She simply was. Her passion was art, a wild, untamed talent that poured from her in a riot of color and form. She painted her family as giants holding up the sky, her mother's hair flowing into rivers, her father's hands as mountains protecting a valley where she and Elias played. David had become a constant, beloved presence. The revelation of his paternity had, paradoxically, cemented his place in the family. Freed from the shadow of a biological expectation he could never meet, he relaxed into his role as a brother and son. He was the fun uncle, the one who would sneak the kids ice cream before dinner and teach them mildly rebellious rock anthems on a toy guitar. He and Anya had reached a quiet truce, a mutual respect built on their shared love for Elijah and the children. The first major crack in this hard-won peace came from an unexpected direction. Rachel. She had married a man from a family as old money and white as their own, and she was pregnant with her first child. The pregnancy seemed to trigger a seismic shift in her perspective. She started visiting more often, watching Anya with a new, intense curiosity. One afternoon, she found Anya in the kitchen, humming an old spiritual her own grandmother had taught her as she prepared a meal. Rachel stood in the doorway, her hand resting on her swollen belly. "That song," Rachel said softly, "it's beautiful." Anya turned, surprised. "It's something my mother used to sing to me." Rachel hesitated, her gaze dropping. I don't know any lullabies, not real ones. My nanny sang German folk songs and mother was always at a committee meeting." She looked up, her eyes glistening. "I'm terrified, Anya. I don't know how to be a mother. I look at you with Elias and Amara. You're so natural with them. You know who they are. I'm afraid my child will feel like a stranger to me, the way I always felt like a stranger to my parents." It was the most vulnerable Rachel had ever been with her. Anya put down her knife and wiped her hands. "It's not about knowing lullabies, Rachel. It's about presence. It's about seeing them. You'll learn, you already are." She gestured to the vegetables. "You can start by learning how to make this. It was my grandmother's recipe. It's a good story to tell while you cook." That simple act, the sharing of a recipe, a story, a piece of her heritage, became a bridge. Rachel began to seek Anya out, not as her father's wife, but as a woman who possessed a kind of knowledge her own world had never valued. She was learning for the first time from a black woman, and it was saving her. The ultimate test of their rebuilt world arrived with a formal, cream-colored envelope. The Thorne Family Foundation, the original staid institution headed by Catherine's brother, was hosting its 50th anniversary gala. It was the inner sanctum of Elijah's old life, a world of was-pish exclusivity he had happily left behind. The invitation was addressed to Mr. Elijah Thorne and guest. "They didn't even put my name," Anya said, holding the thick cardstock. It was a deliberate snub, a final, petty attempt to pretend she didn't exist. "We're not going," Elijah said flatly. But Anya was quiet, her gaze fixed on the invitation. "No," she said finally, her voice firm. "We are." He stared at her. "Anya, it's a lion's den. They'll eat you alive with their polite smiles and their coded comments." "Let them try," she replied, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. It was the same smile she'd had when she'd faced down the woman in the park. "I am your wife, the mother of your children." the co-head of a foundation that is doing more real good than that fossil has done in a decade. I am not a guest in your life, Elijah. It's time they saw that. It's time they saw us. The night of the gala, she was a vision. She wore a gown of deep emerald green that made her skin glow, her hair styled in an elegant crown of braids. She looked regal, powerful, utterly unassailable. Elijah, in his tuxedo, felt a surge of pride so fierce it was almost painful. They arrived arm in arm, a united front. The ballroom was a time capsule of his past. The same faces, older now, the same murmured conversations ceasing as they entered. He felt the weight of 100 stares, the collective intake of breath. He saw Catherine, poised and elegant, her eyes widening almost imperceptibly. He saw his former brother-in-law, his expression a mask of stiff disapproval. But Anya held his arm, her head high, her smile gracious and unshakable. She moved through the crowd, greeting people she knew from her work, her composure a fortress. When Catherine approached, the moment hung in the balance. "Elijah," Catherine said, her voice cool. She nodded at Anya. "Anya, that's a bold color." "Thank you, Catherine," Anya replied, her tone warm but unwavering. "It's the color of growth and resilience." She glanced around the room. "A beautiful event. It reminds me of the first Thorn Gala I ever attended. So much has changed since then." The subtext was deafening. Catherine's smile was brittle. Indeed. It was then that the Foundation's chairman took the podium for his speech. He droned on about legacy, tradition, and the Thorn family's enduring values. Then he said, "And of course, we are so pleased to have Elijah Thorn with us tonight, a stalwart of this institution for so many years." There was a smattering of applause. Elijah gave a curt nod, but the chairman wasn't finished. He smiled, a condescending twist of his lips. "And he's brought a lovely companion. So good of you to come, my dear." The air left the room. The insult was delivered with a velvet glove, but it was a slap nonetheless. Companion. The erasure was absolute. Elijah felt a white-hot rage ignite in his chest. He started to stand, to say something that would burn every bridge to cinders. But Anya's hand on his arm stopped him. She stood slowly, gracefully. She did not look at the chairman. She looked at the crowd. "Thank you for that warm welcome," she said, her voice clear and resonant, carrying to the far corners of the ballroom without needing a microphone. "But my name is Anya Thorn. I am Elijah's wife. I am the mother of his children, Elias and Amara, and I am the director of the Johnson Thorn Foundation, which, just last quarter, funded literacy programs in 30 schools that this foundation has historically overlooked." She paused, letting the silence thicken. "You speak of legacy. I think about legacy every day. I think about the legacy I am building for my son, a brilliant, kind young boy who the world will too often judge by the color of his skin before it hears the wisdom in his words. I think about the legacy I am building for my daughter, a fierce, creative force who I am teaching to take up space in a world that will tell her to make herself small." She turned her gaze directly to the chairman. "Legacy isn't a plaque on a wall or a name on a building. It's the story your children tell about you. It's the world you help them build. Our legacy," she said, her hand finding Elijah's and gripping it tight, "is a map, and it includes everyone." She sat down. The silence was absolute for a full 3 seconds, and then from the back of the room a single person began to clap. It was David. Then Rachel standing beside him, her hands coming together firmly. Then others, more and more, a rising tide of applause that wasn't just polite but fervent, grateful. The old guard sat in stunned silence, but a new generation, and those with the courage to see it, were applauding the mapmaker. They left the gala early, walking out not as exiles but as conquerors of a different sort. In the car, Elijah looked at her, his heart so full he thought it might burst. "You," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "are the most formidable person I have ever known." She leaned her head against his shoulder, the adrenaline finally fading, leaving behind a quiet, profound exhaustion. "They needed to see," she whispered. "They needed to see that we aren't going anywhere, that our family isn't a scandal, it's a fact. When they arrived home, they checked on the children. Elias was asleep, a book about constellations open on his chest. Amara was asleep, one arm flung over a half-finished, vibrantly colored painting of their family, all of them holding hands, their figures so large they spilled off the edges of the paper. Looking at them, Elijah understood. The battle would never truly be over. There would always be whispers, always be those who saw a companion instead of a wife, a nanny instead of a mother. But the war was won. It was won in this house, in the quiet rhythm of their lives, in the love that was their true, unassailable fortune. The wealthy white CEO had fallen, and in his place was a man who was finally, completely, rich. The victory at the gala was not a silencing of the world, but a shifting of the ground beneath their feet. They were no longer a topic of whispered speculation. They were a fact, a force. Anya's speech, captured on dozens of phone cameras and leaked to a gleeful media, was dissected and celebrated. She was hailed as an eloquent voice for modern families, her metaphor becoming a shorthand for navigating complex identities. The Old Thorn Foundation, embarrassed and publicly outmaneuvered, made a quiet, substantial donation to the Johnson Thorn Foundation. It was a surrender, and everyone knew it. In the years that followed, the family's roots grew deeper, their bonds more intricate. Elias, at 8, was developing a quiet, steadfast morality that often left his parents humbled. He came home from school one day, unusually quiet. When Anya pressed him, he revealed that a boy in his class had made a joke, a funny comment about people like you being good at basketball. "What did you do, sweetie?" Anya asked, her heart clenching. "I told him it wasn't funny, it was a stereotype," Elias said, his voice matter of fact. "And then I asked him if he was good at math just because he was Asian. He got really quiet. I think he understood." Elijah, listening from the doorway, felt a surge of awe. His son, at 8, had handled a situation with more grace and effectiveness than he, Elijah, had mustered for most of his adult life. He was being outclassed by a third grader, and he couldn't have been prouder. Amara, meanwhile, was a force of creative nature. Her art evolved from joyful explosions of color to more nuanced, powerful statements. For a school project on heroes, she didn't paint a historical figure or a superhero. She painted a double portrait. On one side was her mother, rendered in warm, glowing tones, her braids intertwined with flourishing vines, holding a compass. On the other was her father, depicted in cooler shades of silver and blue, his hands not holding money or a gavel, but holding the edges of the canvas itself, as if framing and supporting the entire image. The title in her careful, looping script was The Mapmakers. Her teacher, moved to tears, asked to display it in the school lobby. It became a talking point for parents and children alike, a silent, beautiful lesson in a hallway. David became a permanent fixture, moving into the guest house. He had found his calling not in the corporate world, but in woodworking, crafting beautiful, bespoke furniture. He built the twins a magnificent treehouse, a rustic castle in the oak tree that became their fortress of imagination. He was the cool, steady presence, the uncle who understood video games and could fix a broken bicycle chain. The ghost of his paternity no longer haunted him. In this messy, vibrant family, he had found his true lineage. The most profound transformation, however, was in Rachel. The birth of her daughter, Lily, had shattered the last of her icy reserve. She saw, in the helpless dependence of her own child, the universal need for unconditional love, a need her own upbringing had starved. She watched Anya with a hungry intensity, not with envy, but with a desperate desire to learn. One rainy afternoon, Rachel found Anya in the living room, braiding Amara's hair while Elias read aloud from a book. It was a scene of such effortless, domestic intimacy that it once would have made Rachel feel like an outsider. Now, she saw it as a blueprint. "Can you show me," Rachel asked, her voice tentative, "how to do that for Lily?" Anya looked up, surprised, then smiled. "Of course, sit." For the next hour, Rachel sat at Anya's feet, her own fine, straight hair a stark contrast to her daughter's and niece. Anya guided her hands, showing her the rhythm and tension of braiding, a skill passed down through generations of black mothers. It was more than a hairstyle. It was a ritual, a transfer of care, a language of love written in the parting of hair and the weaving of strands. As Rachel fumbled with the tiny, silky strands of Lily's hair, she wasn't just learning a technique. She was learning how to touch her daughter with intention, how to create a moment of connection that was theirs alone. She was, finally, learning how to be a mother, and her teacher was the woman she had once resented. Elijah watched this scene from the doorway, his heart performing a slow, painful, and beautiful unraveling. This was the legacy, not the stock portfolios or the corporate headquarters, but this, his daughter learning the art of motherhood from his wife. His family, once two separate warring factions, had become a single, sprawling, magnificent tree, its branches intertwined, its roots deep and mutual. The challenges did not vanish. When Elias was 9, he was followed around a convenience store by a suspicious clerk, his mere presence deemed a threat. Elijah arrived to pick him up and saw the hurt and confusion in his son's eyes. The conversation that followed was one of the hardest of Elijah's life, explaining the concept of racial profiling to a child who still believed in fairness. When Amara was 10, a group of girls at a new summer camp told her she wasn't really black because she talked like a white girl. She came home furious and heartbroken, the violence of the rejection from within her own community a confusing new wound. Anya held her, letting her cry, then told her stories of her own grandmother, a teacher who had insisted on proper English as a tool of empowerment, and of the rich, vibrant slang of her childhood neighborhood. "You are not too much of anything, my love," Anya whispered. "You are exactly enough of everything. You are the map. You contain multitudes." Through it all, Elijah was a student. He learned to listen more than he spoke. He learned that his instinct to solve problems with money or power was often the wrong tool. He learned that his role was often to stand beside Anya and the children, to amplify their voices, to use his privilege as a shield, not a sword. The arrogant CEO was a distant memory, a character from a book he'd read long ago. On the twins' 12th birthday, they gathered in the backyard, their whole messy, glorious map of a family. David was manning the grill, Rachel was braiding Lily's hair with a newfound confidence, and Elijah and Anya sat at a picnic table, their hands linked, watching their children. Elias, now on the cusp of adolescence, was deep in conversation with David about the physics of his latest treehouse modification. Amara was showing her latest painting to a captivated group of her friends, a swirling, abstract piece she called The Sound of Laughter. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in Amara's favorite shades of magenta and gold, Elias stood and tapped his glass with a spoon. The crowd quieted. He looked at his parents, his gaze clear and steady. "I just wanted to say thank you," he began, his voice still boyish but carrying a new weight. "For making this family, for making our map." He looked at his sister. "Amara and I were talking. We know our family is different. People sometimes stare. Sometimes they say things, but we think our map is the best one, because it has so many different places on it. It has Grandma Beatrice's stories and Uncle David's treehouses and Aunt Rachel's braids and—" he paused, looking at his father. "And it has Dad, who learned how to be a dad by loving us." He looked at his mother, his love for her a palpable force. "And it has Mom, who taught us all how to be brave." The simplicity and profundity of his words left a stunned silence in their wake. Amara jumped up, throwing her arm around her brother. "Yeah, what he said." In that moment, surrounded by the tangled, beautiful, imperfect love they had built, Elijah Thorne knew a completion so absolute it felt like a new beginning. The wealthy white CEO had fallen for his black worker, a moment of vulnerability that had sparked a scandal, a betrayal, and a love that had rewritten the definition of legacy. She had given him children, yes, but more than that, she had given him a new world. A world where the greatest wealth was not in a bank, but in the braiding of a child's hair, the courage of a son's words, and the boundless, map-making power of a love that had refused to be defined by anything but its own strength. Their story was far from over, but the ending was no longer in doubt. It would be, always and forever, a story of love. The fireflies eventually vanished, and the children's laughter was replaced by the soft chirping of crickets. The family moved inside, the warmth of the house embracing them like a second skin. The tapestry in the kitchen seemed to glow in the dim light, its threads holding the memory of the evening. Elijah was quieter than usual, but his silence was a comfortable one, a vessel filled to the brim with contentment. That night, as he and Anya prepared for bed, he moved a little slower, his breaths a little more deliberate. He stood before the window, looking out at the moon-washed garden, a place that held every season of their love. "Do you remember?" he said, his voice a soft rumble in the quiet room, the sound Amara made when she first laughed, that tiny hiccuping giggle. Anya came to stand beside him, slipping her arm around his waist. "Of course I do. It was the day you tried to put her sun hat on and put it on backwards. She thought you were the funniest man in the world." A smile touched his lips, and Elia's first word, it was mama or dada. "It was why," he chuckled, the sound warm and full. He looked me right in the eye and asked why, as if I held all the secrets of the universe and was being stingy with them. "You did your best to answer," Anya said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "You always did." He turned to her then, his hands, now age-spotted and slightly tremulous, coming up to cradle her face. He looked at her as he had in the storeroom, as he had over 1,000 dinners, as he had in the delivery room, as he had in every crisis and every triumph, with a love that had become the defining truth of his existence. "Anya Johnson," he whispered, his eyes gleaming with unshed tears. "My wife, my map, my life." He kissed her then, a kiss that was not of passion but of sacrament, a seal upon the promise they had made, a lifetime ago, in the unlikeliest of places. Later, as they lay in the darkness, their hands linked on the pillow between them, his breathing evened out into the deep, steady rhythm of sleep. Anya lay awake for a while, listening to the sound, a lullaby she knew by heart. She felt the rise and fall of his chest against her arm, a tide she had followed for 30 years. Sometime before dawn the rhythm changed. It shallowed, softened, and then peacefully it stopped. The silence that filled the room was different from all the silences that had come before. It was vast and holy. Anya didn't need to turn on the light to know. She felt it. The great, formidable engine of his heart, which had learned to beat not for power but for love, had finally, gently, run its course. She did not cry out. She did not shake him. She simply tightened her grip on his hand and brought it to her lips, kissing his knuckles, each one a familiar landscape. "Thank you," she whispered into the quiet, "for choosing me, for choosing us, for learning." The morning broke, soft and gray. The family, sensing the shift in the universe before a word was spoken, gathered slowly. Elias, summoned by a feeling, arrived first, Chloe and little Beatrice with him. He saw his mother sitting on the edge of the bed, still holding his father's hand, and he knew. He crossed the room and knelt beside her, wrapping his arms around both his parents, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Amara arrived next, her poet husband a steadying presence behind her. She let out a small, wounded sound, like a bird, and rushed to the other side of the bed, laying her head on her father's still chest. David and Rachel came, their faces etched with a grief that was pure and uncomplicated by the old resentments. They didn't call the authorities immediately. They sat with him, this man who had been a titan and then a father, and they told stories. They talked about the terrible pancakes he used to make on Sundays, the way he cried at every school play, the patient way he'd taught them all to drive, his knuckles white on the dashboard. They laughed through their tears. The room was not a place of death, but a sanctuary of memory. The news of Elijah Thorne's passing was met with respectful obituaries in the financial press, but the real mourning happened in the quiet of the family home, and in the countless communities touched by the foundation he and Anya had built. The narrative the world had once devoured, the scandal, the betrayal, was a footnote now. The headline of his life, the one that mattered, was simple: he loved. He learned. He built a family. At the funeral, Elias spoke not of the CEO, but of the father who had knelt on a linoleum floor. Amara did not deliver a eulogy. She unveiled a painting, a serene, powerful portrait of her father, not in a suit, but in his garden, his hand resting on the trunk of the old oak tree, his face turned towards the sun. It was titled "The Cartographer at Rest." In the weeks and months that followed, Anya's grief was a deep, private river. She wore his old sweaters and spent hours in the garden, talking to him as she weeded. But she was not broken. The strength he had always admired in her was now the pillar that held up the sky. She continued her work, her voice perhaps a little quieter, but no less potent. One afternoon, she found little Kofi, Amara's son, trying to draw on the kitchen wall with a crayon. Amara started to scold him, but Anya stopped her. She knelt down, her knees protesting, and took the crayon from his chubby hand. "Here, my love," she said softly, leading him to a large sheet of paper she spread on the floor. "This is a better place for maps." She sat with him, watching as he scrawled joyful, meaningless lines, a new territory being explored. She looked up at the tapestry on the wall, at the silver thread that represented the man she had loved. The map was not finished. It was still being woven, new threads added every day, its borders expanding with every child's laugh, every act of kindness, every moment of courage. Elijah's journey was complete, but the map endured. And Anya, the first cartographer, was still there, ensuring its legacy of love would guide them all forever. The silence after Elijah was a presence, a character in the house. It was not an empty silence, but a thick, resonant one, woven through with 30 years of shared breath. Anya moved through it with a practiced grace. She would set the table for one, but still occasionally reach for a second coffee mug. She would wake in the night and her hand would stray to his side of the bed, finding cool linen instead of warm skin. The grief was a physical thing, a low, constant hum in her bones, but it was not a shattering. He had built her too well for that. The family orbited her now, their gravitational center shifted but not broken. Elias and Chloe brought Beatrice over several times a week. The little girl, with her preternatural solemnity, seemed to understand her grandmother's quiet. She would climb into Anya's lap with a book, not demanding to be read to, but just to sit, her small body a warm, breathing comfort. She was the only one who could make Anya laugh with her full, unguarded laugh, a sound that echoed Elijah's in its sudden, joyful depth. "Grandma," Beatrice asked one afternoon, her small finger tracing the silver thread in the tapestry that was her grandfather, "is heaven on the map?" Anya looked at the intricate weaving, at the sprawling, beautiful territory of their lives. "I think so, my love," she said softly. "I think it's the place where all the maps finally make perfect sense." Amara dealt with her grief through a furious burst of creativity. She began a new series, not of paintings, but of sculptures. She used materials that felt eternal: stone, forged iron, reclaimed wood. The pieces were strong, maternal, rooted. They were titled The Foundation, and each one was a love letter to resilience, to the unseen structures that hold up the world. She rarely spoke about her father directly, but in the fierce, protective curve of a bronze form or the unyielding strength of a granite base, he was there. Her son, Kofi, now a wild-haired toddler, would play among her sculptures, his joyful chaos a perfect counterpoint to their solidity. It was David who took Elijah's loss the hardest, in a way that surprised everyone, including himself. The man who had chosen to be his father was gone. The anchor of that chosen love, so hard won, was suddenly lifted, and he felt adrift. He withdrew into his workshop for days, the sound of his sanding and planning a frantic, mournful rhythm. One evening, Anya went out to him. The workshop smelled of cedar and grief. David was staring at a half-finished rocking horse, his shoulders slumped. "He commissioned it," David said, his voice rough. "For Kofi, for his birthday. I was almost done." He picked up a sanding block, his hand trembling. I can't get the curve of the neck right. He always said I was too hard on the wood, to let the grain guide me. Anya came and stood beside him, laying a hand on his back. She didn't offer platitudes. She simply stood with him in the storm. After a long silence, David spoke again, the words torn from him. He was the only one who ever saw me, not as a mistake or a problem or a disappointment. He saw me, and he chose to be my dad anyway. He finally broke, great, wrenching sobs shaking his frame. What do I do without that, Anya? What do I do without that gaze? She turned him and pulled him into an embrace, this grown man, her husband's son, and held him as he wept. You carry it, she whispered into his shoulder. You carry it in here, she tapped his chest. And you learn to see yourself that way. That was his final gift to you, David. Not his name, not his money, his sight. He gave you his eyes, now you have to use them. The next day, David returned to the rocking horse. He worked more slowly, his touch more reverent. He did not force the wood. He followed the grain. When it was finished, it was a piece of profound beauty, the curve of the neck proud and gentle. He brought it into the house and placed it in the living room. It was not just a toy, it was a testament. A year after Elijah's passing, on the anniversary of his death, the family gathered again. It was not a somber affair. Anya had insisted. They gathered in the garden under the old oak tree. The tapestry hung on the wall inside, but Amara had brought a smaller, portable loom. She set it up on the grass. He's a new thread now, she announced to the family. A memory thread, but memories are still part of the map, so we're going to weave him back in. She had prepared threads in the colors they associated with him. The silver of his hair, the deep blue of his favorite sweater, the warm brown of his eyes. One by one, each member of the family came forward. Elias wove in a strand of silver, his movements precise and thoughtful. Amara added a splash of blue, bold and vibrant. David, his hands steady now, worked in a strand of brown, his joinery perfect. Rachel added a thread, then Chloe. Even little Beatrice was helped to push the shuttle through, adding a bright, golden thread for his laugh, she explained seriously. Anya was the last. She took the shuttle, her hands, now thin and veined, moving with a slow, certain grace. She didn't add a new color. Instead, she took the existing threads, the silver, the blue, the brown, the gold, and wove them tightly together, binding them into the heart of the tapestry, making the memory of him inseparable from the whole. When it was done, they all stood back. The tapestry was different. It had not just added a new element, it had transformed. The memory of Elijah was now integrated, a strengthening gold and silver strand that ran through the entire piece, connecting all the territories, binding all the lives. That night, as the fireflies emerged once more, Anya sat alone on the porch. The house behind her was full of the sounds of her family, Elias and Chloe debating, Amara's son shrieking with laughter, David telling a story. She felt Elijah's absence like a physical ache, a space that would never be filled. But as she looked out at the garden, at the oak tree he had loved, she realized something. The map was not a record of a journey completed. It was a living, breathing, growing thing. Elijah's chapter was written in full, a story of arrogant fall and glorious redemption. But the map itself was endless. Her story was still being written. Elias' story, with its quiet power, was unfolding. Amara, with its brilliant, chaotic beauty, was still splashing color onto the world. The grandchildren were new, uncharted lands, full of mystery and promise. The wealthy white CEO had fallen for his black worker. It had been a scandal, a betrayal, a forbidden romance. But that was just the first sentence. The rest of the story was about what they built from the ashes of that scandal, a family, a legacy not of blood but of choice, a map of love. Anya Johnson Thorne took a deep breath of the night air, scented with jasmine and damp earth. She was a widow, a grandmother, a matriarch, a cartographer. She was alone, and yet she was surrounded by the living, breathing proof of their love. The story was not over. It was simply being passed on, a compass for the generations to come, its true north forever set by the moment a cold man's hands had fumbled with a broken zipper. and in doing so had unlocked his own frozen heart. The story of Elijah and Anya Thorne, of the map they drew with the ink of their love and the parchment of their lives, did not end with a final period, but with an ellipsis, a quiet promise of more. The world continued to turn, and the loom of their family continued to weave. Anya lived for another 10 years. They were years not of decline, but of distillation. She became the living heart of the family, the keeper of the stories. She wrote a memoir not for publication but for her grandchildren and the great-grandchildren who began to arrive. She titled it The Zipper and the Compass. In it, she chronicled not just the grand moments of scandal and triumph, but the small, sacred ones. The weight of a sleeping child, the sound of the front door closing, knowing your whole world was safely under one roof, the way Elijah's hand had felt in hers. She saw Elia's think tank become an influential force in shaping economic policy, its ideas on equitable wealth distribution debated in halls of power he had once been excluded from. She saw him, a father of 2 more children now, become the same kind of patient, present dad his father had learned to be. The Thorne name, once a symbol of cold corporate power, was now synonymous in certain circles with integrity and justice. She saw Amara become a globally revered artist, her work displayed in museums that once would never have acknowledged her existence. She never compromised, her art growing more profound and challenging with age. She bought a vast, rambling property upstate and turned it into an artist's residency, a sanctuary for young mapmakers of all kinds. Kofi, her son, grew into a young man with his mother's artistic fire and his grandfather's quiet strength, a new kind of blend. David's furniture business flourished, his pieces coveted for their soulful integrity. He never put a Thorne label on them, his own name was his legacy. He and Rachel grew closer than ever, their shared history a bond that transcended their different origins. Their children and Rachel's daughter Lily were cousins in the truest sense, their connection to the tapestry unbreakable. When Anya's time came, it was as peaceful as Elijah's. She was in her garden, deadheading roses, when she simply sat down on her favorite bench and closed her eyes. She was found by little Beatrice, now a teenager, who simply sat beside her, holding her hand until the others came, understanding that this was not an emergency but a completion. The family grieved, but the grief was tempered with a profound gratitude. They had been loved by giants. At the joint memorial for Anya and Elijah, for it was unthinkable to honor them separately, the church, the park, the foundation headquarters were all overflowing. The powerful and the humble stood side by side, but the most powerful eulogy was not spoken. It was the family itself. Elias, now graying at the temples, stood with his arm around Chloe, their children standing tall and sure beside them. Amara, her hair a magnificent silver crown of braids, stood with her poet and Kofi, her gaze steady. David and Rachel and their clans formed a solid, loving wall. They did not need to say anything. Their lives were the testimony. The scandalous headline from decades past was now a historical curiosity, a relic of a smaller, crueler world. The true headline, the one written in the lives of their descendants, was one of resilience, love, and the radical act of building a family across every line the world tried to draw. The tapestry now hangs in the main hall of the Johnson Thorne Foundation. Schoolchildren on tour stop before it, listening to the story of the mapmakers. They learn about the arrogant CEO and the brilliant worker, about the broken zipper and the children who became a new world. They are told that love is a verb, an action, a thing you build and fight for every single day. And if you stand very still before that tapestry in the quiet of the evening, you can almost feel it. It's not just thread and wool. It's a living, breathing thing. It's the sound of a little girl's hiccuping laugh, the scent of sandalwood and bergamot, the weight of a newborn in the crook of an arm, the fierce, protective curve of a bronze sculpture, the patient rhythm of a plane on wood. It is the silent, unwavering gaze of a father who chose his son. It is the strength of a woman who refused to be erased. The wealthy white CEO fell for his black worker. She gave him kids, and in return they gave each other and the world a map to a better place. A place where the only borders that matter are the ones around the human heart, and the only legacy worth leaving is written in love. Their story is over, but the map remains, and it is still being read.